Well, hello. My name is Angel Wood, and this is Crime of the Truest Kind. Welcome back to the show. That is Mellow Bravo, Where the Bodies Lay. I love the band. I love the song. In fact, they just did a reunion show here in Cambridge, where I am at the end of July. I do kind of miss the old intro song, though. I will confess to that. Follow the show, Crime of the Truest Kind, on Facebook and Instagram, at Truest Kind on Twitter. Also, on TikTok, I post videos, mostly of my dogs. I am getting back into the groove of production, so thanks for sticking with me. This week is part 2 of Your Good Man, Phil Hartman, with my friend and radio colleague, Brian Mulhern. He's a Rhode Islander. If you're wondering if there was a New England connection, there always is. So if you have not yet, please do go back and listen to part 1 from last week. We started our Phil Hartman conversation. And I also want to throw this reminder at you that this show is really about how Phil Hartman lived, not about how he died. I have been a Phil Hartman fan from his very early days of Saturday Night Live. I remain an SNL fan and watch it still pretty faithfully. Phil Hartman did a lot of characters. A few of my personal favorites. Well, here's one.
Fine. But please, don't tell Mrs. Clinton.
Jim, let me tell you something. There's going to be a whole bunch of things we don't tell Mrs. Clinton. Fast food is the least of our worries, okay, buddy?
Oh, my God! It's Bill Clinton!
Oh, my God. Hey, hold it. Hey, how you doing? Nice to meet you. How are you? Oh, that's an adorable baby. What's your name, sweetheart?
Her name is Shakira.
Shakira. That means African princess, doesn't it?
Oh, why, yes!
Well, she certainly is beautiful enough to be a princess. Say, you gonna finish these fries?
Yes, that is Phil Hartman as former President Bill Clinton. For those of you who are not aware and weren't old enough to know, Bill Clinton loved fast food. He got healthier later. Here's another one. This is a very famous line from the 1990s Saturday Night Live. This is Phil Hartman as Frank Sinatra. The other voice you hear is Sting as Billy Idol.
You're all talk, Blondie. You want a piece of me? I'm right here.
Don't provoke me, old man.
You don't scare me. I got chunks of guys like you in my stool.
All right. I'll rip your bloody head off.
Steve, go kick his ass.
He's still incredibly funny, and so much of it is available on YouTube. You could spend hours and hours catching up just on Phil Hartman on SNL, let alone all of the other things that he did, like The Simpsons and News Radio and his movies. I haven't seen very many of his movies. In the first part of my conversation with Brian Mulhern, which I would recommend you listening to before you crack open this episode, Brian walks us through how he came to meet and get to know Phil. He simply sent him stuff in the mail. Here's a clip from the last days of Phil Hartman that aired on ABC in 2019.
Well, I'm going to do my own show for NBC, The Phil Show, which will be a sketch comedy show.
Phil brought in the young comedy writers Kevin and Brian Mulhern to develop the show.
It was just going to be a series of sketches, commercial parodies, not unlike what you would see on Saturday Night Live, but this one would be more Phil-centric.
Hi, Brian and Kevin. It's Phil Hartman
Brian was watching Phil Hartman on David Letterman, where Phil said, I'm working on a new show. I'm looking for writers. Brian and his brother Kevin, who were writing comedy, put together a packet of some of their stuff and sent it to 30 Rock. And Phil Hartman got it and opened it and read it and called them at their parents' house. It's a pretty incredible story. And hearing it from Brian, who is a friend of mine, I can tell you with 100% certainty that it's all true. Revisiting a lot of this Phil Hartman stuff has been pretty great. I feel like I've gotten to know him a lot more through these conversations. This is the second half of my conversation with Brian Mulhern, comedy writer, radio host, and friend of Phil Hartman. He misses him very, very much. Oh, and there'll be a cameo from Rerun the Beagle.
No matter how long you knew him or how close you got to him, did you know the real him? And there was always jokes about him being the man of 1,000 voices and then hiding behind characters. And at times I could see what people meant. Please pardon my beagle. Got a little activity here in the Mulhern.
It's usually my house making all the noise, so you can have it.
He would also be very open and vulnerable with me at times, and would give me little peeks into some of the things that were going on and talking to me about Men Are From Mars and all that other stuff. I'll never forget. There was the first season of News Radio after the Phil show fell apart, and he was on that show, and he called me one day, and I could tell that he was really upset. And I didn't have many conversations with him like that. And I remember being kind of taken aback by it because I'm still in my mid-20s, and I said, "What's the matter?" And he said, I don't feel like I'm pulling my weight on the show." And I said, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "You're pretty much the whole show." At least in my opinion, and maybe I'm a little bit biased, but he said, I don't know. And he just said, I don't feel like I'm delivering. And I feel like there are other people on the show that are funnier than I am. And
imposter syndrome. We have that.
I know. And even somebody on his, I'm like, what chance do I have if I'm talking Phil Hartman down off of a ledge? And so he was even talking about too, how, oh my God, rerun, please. I've got a beagle who's determined to be on a true crime podcast. He's like, they put my name last in the credits, and there was all this insecurity, and I was just like, oh my God, I can't believe that this guy is not seeing what he means to the show. And I even reminded him, like, you're the glue, man. Like, and I know, I'm sure this cast feels exactly the same way. And they did. They all revered him.
They loved him.
I got to meet a lot of them when he got his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Candy Alexander just could not, like, I'm saying this in a polite way, like, would not shut up about him. But I was doing the same thing. I mean, it was just, they adored him. And I remember the only thing that made him feel better too, and he felt like, where he wasn't pulling his weight and people were shining over him, I said, look, man, think about the Mary Tyler Moore Show. I think Ted Baxter is one of the funniest characters in the history of the medium. And they kind of used him as a seasoning, something like kind of like Creed on The Office, but maybe a little bit more than Creed. But in the moments where he was used, it was just like, oh my God, that just made the whole show. And I said, you're in an ensemble. That's the situation that you find yourself in. But you are also the veteran of that group. Yeah. And by the time I got done putting it that way, and then he was fine. But then when I tried to compliment him further, he withdrew from me and got all uncomfortable. And I tell that story to say, like, it could be a roller coaster with him sometimes in terms of what he let you in on, where the line was. And I can't even imagine, for as much as I adored him too, being married to that, because being married is just so much about communication and difficult conversations and the work that you have to put into it. And when he would withdraw, I can't even imagine how frustrating that is for all three of his wives. I mean, the first one, they were young. Second one, I think they really were in love, but he just, for whatever reason, he could do everything well in his life, as I said, but maybe that.
Yeah, he didn't know what to do with that. That left, his wife, Lisa, that left her like, I don't know where I can go with this, because it takes two, right? It takes two.
Right.
she needs a willing parties on both sides. I believe she does love him to this day, based on the way she speaks about him.
And I think she was a perfect match for him because, first of all, she was on the Last Days. Everybody adored her. That's all I heard about from the producers and everything. Oh my God, she's amazing.
Wonderful.
There's an authorized biography about Phil written by Mike Thomas, formerly of the Chicago Sun-Times. Mike and I have become very friendly. And she was involved in that book and up and down singing her praises, just what a wonderful, wonderful person she is. So it doesn't surprise anybody the depth of the feelings that the two of them had, because he was a wonderful guy. And it was probably such a good match. But as you said, it takes two people working on it. And if one person just doesn't have the wherewithal to get that done, it's a recipe for disaster. I don't care how nice or lovable somebody is. It gets very frustrating.
He was probably very consumed, and we know how much energy this can take out of us when we're in it. You're running and you're on the track. You're trying to get on the track and you're trying to get to that next level. And definitely where he was in that time, he hadn't established a career yet. When he was married to his second wife. So
right.
Lord knows what he was thinking about. He felt probably up against the clock, like, I'm getting older and I'm not where I think we all think this. I'm not where I think I need to be at this period in my life. Maybe that's a big part of it.
It could have been that. And even when he achieved the success, to get that little peek into the insecurity of it all too.
That must have really surprised you based on everything you knew of him. And at that point, you had been friends and working together as colleagues for a couple of years by then, right? To see that side of him?
It shocked me. I felt differently about it in a couple of ways. Like, in some ways, it was endearing to me, just that level of humility. And he never pulled that star thing. He was never that Hollywood guy or I'm better than anybody. In having conversations, and I'm still very much in touch with his family and have great relationships with a lot of them and some of his friends. Everybody felt like he was their best friend, or he looked at you as if you were the best friend. That was just the kind of guy that he was. But by the same token, a lot of people said that thing. Sometimes I feel like he's got the wall up and I don't really know who he is at his core. That'll take down a dating relationship, never mind a marriage.
Absolutely. Do you think that your conversation with him that night was the last conversation he had with anybody?
I do think that was the case. And basically, to circle back, when I had sent him the 20 pages of the movie, and this was the amazing thing, as he's talking and he's boosting my spirits, and then all of a sudden I hear him laughing, and I said, what happened? He goes, Bryn just flashed me. So I'm like, wow, things must be going well with them. In terms of, and her knowing that he was on the phone with me, who I already thought she didn't really like me all that much. And I just felt so good coming off of that call the night before all of that went down. And then I go to bed that night, and then I go into the radio station the next morning, and I'm literally talking to the woman who did middays, and she's like, how's Phil? I'm like, great. I just talked to him. News radio just got picked up. His wife, seems like they're in a good place. They're going to the beach house, and we're working on this movie, and that's moving along. He's real happy with the pages. No sooner am I saying all of those things that I see a colleague of mine running in white as a ghost saying, Brian, a college buddy of mine who worked at the radio station, is on the phone. He needs to talk to you right now.
Oh.
So I go.
Is this before news broke?
This was before. I didn't know anything. I was just in the radio studio. I had no idea what was going on.
Yeah.
So I picked up. I'm like, hey, what's up, man? He goes, Brian. He goes, I hate to have to be the one to tell you this. He's like, Phil Hartman is dead. And I said, what? He said, he's dead. It's on NBC 10 right now. Put it on. I put it on. It was in commercial. Well, now the dog has the loudest toy in the house. So when I saw the commercial, I said, dude, if this is your idea of a joke, it's not funny. Because how in the world could this man be dead? I just talked to him.
How is it? It does not compute.
No, it doesn't. And so then I was kind of annoyed, and I walked back into the studio, and the friend who told me about the phone call and the midday woman are standing there holding the AP copy, looking at it, and they just looked at it, and they looked at me, and they were white as ghosts. And in that moment, I knew it was true. So now I'm starting to think to myself, who did this? How could this have happened? And he loved guns, which, by the way, he was like such a hippie surfer dude. I just never, it just seemed so against type, but he just had interest in a lot of different things. But I also knew too that Bryn did not feel safe at home a lot of times when he would be off shooting a movie. I think when he did House Guest with Sinbad, that was like in Pennsylvania. She's at home with the two kids. Like anybody who does anything in show business who performs, you have some fans who are a little wacky, and she would get nervous.
We have those in radio.
We do. So my first thought was, oh my God, I'm thinking about all the guns in the house. Did somebody try to come into the house? Was it a crazed fan? What's going on?
Yeah.
Not in a million years.
Was it a George Harrison situation?
Right. Never imagining that it could possibly be her. But then immediately my next thought was, oh my God, I was probably the last person who ever spoke to him.
Wow.
And I'm thinking I might be hearing from the police. And then you start playing the game. I do this with his family from time to time. Was there something we could have done? Was there something that we could have picked up on and all the stuff? And I've had to make peace with the fact that I don't think that this was a premeditated, necessarily inevitable thing. I think it was just somebody who had a history of substance abuse having a really, really bad night. And in terms of whether or not I was the last person to speak with him, I think it was one of the kids who said that they had heard them having an argument at some point. And there was a move that he used to pull with her where he would pretend that he was asleep if he didn't want to have an awkward conversation. And
that angered her.
Yes. And whether he was asleep or whether he wasn't asleep, I'm hoping he was asleep in that horrible moment. I think that was something in her altered state of mind and something that drove her crazy when he would do that. That could have been the thing that put her over the top.
In my research, I look at everything. I look at autopsy reports, and I just do. And, it wasn't ever a secret that he was shot 3 times, and it wasn't a secret that he was shot 1 time in the throat. And isn't it interesting that who knows what she was thinking? That she did that to a man who was this golden voice.
The man of 1,000 voices, silence.
She shot him in the throat. It's sick to think about. I mean, it's all of it sick.
Right.
That her children were in the next room, that she was so out of her mind. We know that drug abuse is mental illness. What comes is chicken or the egg? Are you mentally ill because you abuse drugs, or do you abuse drugs because you're mentally ill? I'm not a scientist. I don't really fucking know.
Well, my pay grade, I don't know. I've been in plenty of things, but I can't answer that question.
Something terrible happened. Something led up to that. Something was brewing. I want to ask you this because it came up in the research. Andy Dick is blamed for her relapse. What information have you discussed with friends and family about that?
I mean, allegedly, it was a New Year's Eve party at Phil's house, and obviously the murder occurred in May, and she had been clean for a while, and Andy had coke with him, and they went off in the bathroom, and that is allegedly what got her started again. And I ended up getting to know and working with Andy Dick after Phil's murder. Never felt comfortable bringing the topic up with him. In some ways, I didn't want to know, because I had to work with him, and I didn't think it would be a good working relationship if I knew too much about that. So for the longest time, I prevented myself from going down that rabbit hole, whether that be with him or with anybody else otherwise.
It's definitely part of the dialogue that comes from the events of that night.
But I can tell you, too, that Phil had the same kind of affection for Andy that he had for Chris. And I think, damaged people, I really think, and even his wife, I think he thought that he wanted to fix those people.
I think he had compassion for all of them.
Drawn to them.
Yeah.
That's the extent of what I know about the Andy Dick thing, other than Lovett's kicking the living daylights out of him.
He was very angry. He was very, very, with good reason.
Well, and imagine this. Once Phil dies, the show had been picked up. They're committed to another season. What do? All right, let's replace him with John Lovitz, his best friend, who now has to go on a set of a studio and work with Andy Dick with the knowledge that he has or with what, he suspected. I can't even imagine what that must have been like, what it must have been like on that set.
And time has not been kind to Andy Dick, don't we know?
It most certainly has not. And it's very unfortunate because Andy is somebody who I really do think has an immense amount of talent.
Absolutely.
And that's really a shame. And you want to talk about how things can't end. Sometimes things end poorly in many different kinds of directions. And you and I were having a little conversation before we started this. And I said to you, the thing that really bothers me about Phil, he died when he was 49. When I turned 49, every day I thought, this is a day Phil didn't experience. And I think about that all the time. And I ask myself, what more could he have done if he was still here? How many more laughs would we have gotten out of him? What would he be doing now?
Yeah, tell me, what do you think? What do you think he would be doing if you could look into the crystal? I think about those things with all of some of my favorite people, Lane Staley, Kurt Cobain. What would they be doing? And I talk about this with family members that have been taken by violent crime. What do you think your loved one would be doing at this point in their life? What do you think Phil Hartman, what were his later years going to be like?
Well, it's interesting because one area where he would tend to make bad decisions, and in my fantasy, it would go the other way, which is he was really bad at picking movies. And a lot of times, the reasons why he would take a movie, even I would be like, what are you doing, man? And I would have hoped that at this point, he would have turned that around. And I can't remember who said it. Somebody pretty famous too. It escapes me, but somebody said that Phil was a talent on the level that they think that not only would he have maybe made some better movies, but that the potential for him to become a really good dramatic actor along the lines of a Robin Williams, a Tom Hanks.
Yes.
I don't know how much, or even if you're a fan of Ricky Gervais, I know that can go either way with people, but
I do like him.
Ricky Gervais, did you watch Afterlife?
I haven't watched the latest season. I'm told that it's pretty emotional.
Afterlife may be one of the best finales of anything I've ever seen in my life.
Is that right?
But he is a guy who, it's starting to turn into this for me, and I think he's a very funny guy. But by the time Robin Williams hit this certain point, I'm like, I think he's actually a better dramatic actor than he is a comedian. Like, I think he's that good.
Adam Sandler is that guy. And Sarah Silverman did an amazing job as a dramatic actress. We could go on. And I think that there's something innately special about people like this.
And
somebody
I just
like
think
Phil.
now, too, he'd be in his 70s now, but
yeah,
there are just so many more opportunities now than there were then with the streaming services and everything else. Maybe he finally would have gotten his own series, whether it be on a Netflix or something like that. So it's hard to know, but I know whatever it was, unless it was a bad movie decision. And I remember, he took House Guest with Sinbad because this is kind of the first movie where I'm in a starring role, and like that meant something to him because usually he was kind of a complimentary player.
Yeah.
Jingle All the Way. Well, it's a Schwarzenegger movie. It's going to be a blockbuster. He took this movie Greedy with Michael J. Fox. This is supposed to be Michael J. Fox's comeback. And every time he would say something like that to me, my question in my head, and I would never ask him, was, yeah, but what about the script?
Right. Is it any good?
How is this thing real? Like, it seems like you're doing it more strategically. You're considering that more so than the material. And I kind of hope that he would have maybe figured that out a little bit more. I remember he turned down a role in the Brady Bunch movie, which ended up being really big, to take, I think it was House Guest or maybe it was Greedy. And I think he would have liked to have that one back. When he did Sergeant Bilko with Steve Martin and Dan Aykroyd, when he told me about that, I'm like, well, how could this not work? Well,
yeah,
it kind of didn't work.
What was this agent telling him?
That's a good question. You know what? This is another thing that I think, and I know that this is something that he wanted, and this is how I hope it would have gone for him. He always thought that it would be so cool because he was a great writer. he always thought, even early on, when he was thinking of getting out of SNL and moving on from that, because he was tired of being away from his family. He did, he loved his family, he loved being around his kids, and he didn't want to keep doing the LA to New York thing. So in his fantasy, he had told me, I would love to write a movie that I could star in myself. Kind of do, maybe he could even do the Bill Hader Barry thing or something like that, where you have that creative control. I would love to think that maybe he could have done something like that.
I could see him starting a production company, as so many actors do, and then picking up projects, optioning projects and writing projects himself.
But I also think there is a component to Phil where it wasn't all about his career, and he loved his boats, he loved his planes, and so I think to some degree maybe he would have gotten a little bit more selective when he was older, only take on something that he really thought was great or had some merit, and still be able to spend time as a dad and a husband and kind of sail off into the sunset that way. But sadly, we'll never know. And to even say what substance abuse can do to bring it back around. It didn't kill Andy Dick, but it killed his career. It's such a shame. It's just it's so tragic.
What is your relationship with his family members? I know you did touch on his two children who were after Phil was murdered and Bryn killed herself. It is a murder-suicide. We know that. That's been established. And the children were essentially adopted, taken in by family members, Bryn's sister. And they moved to Wisconsin, I believe, somewhere in the Midwest. Minnesota. And they lived a pretty normal life, I hope.
By all accounts, yes. There was an interesting story that I was told by one of his sisters, because as we were having a discussion one day about, well, what if we had picked up on this, and what if we had done that, and this raised a red flag, or maybe it should have raised more of one. Phil came from a very big family, and at one point, he came to this particular sister and said, if anything ever happens to Bryn and myself, I want you to get the kids. And she said, okay. And she said, I don't know why you trust me. He said to her, you've never asked me for anything. You've never asked for an acting role. You've never asked for money. I know that you're a decent and a solid person. And she was very touched and honored and flattered by that. And then a couple of months before he ended up passing, and his dad had just died. There was a lot going on within the family. He abruptly went to her and said, I'm sorry, it's not going to be you. It's going to be Bryn's sister. Wow. And I think that's what Bryn wanted. That kind of haunted her, and that kind of bothered her, because then she said, well, why did she make that move at that time?
What did I do wrong? Yeah.
Yeah. And also too, it's like, you start to question, was there any premeditation to what happened? Like, you can drive yourself crazy with this stuff. Right. Now, in terms of the kids, I have nothing but hopes for them that they have had a phenomenal life. I hope they know what a great man he was, because I do think from some of what I've heard, and I understand it to a certain degree, Bryn's family obviously wants to protect Bryn and let the kids know that she was a great mom. And I understand all of those things, but I think that there's also a little bit going on of maybe mommy had some problems because daddy wasn't always as present as he could have been. And maybe daddy was a little more committed to his career. And I hope that those rumors aren't true, because that man absolutely adored those kids. Like, that was his whole life. And I hope they know that. And the only quote unquote contact that I've had with them, and a lot of times whenever something goes into production about him, her, the two of them, they're very sensitive about it. And a lot of times they try to prevent it from happening. Right. And I remember when Mike Thomas wrote the biography, I couldn't even remember. I'm like, how did you even track me down? How do you even know who I am? But he was like really, really thorough. And at one point, the kids wanted to be involved in the book, that they wanted to stop the book. I've been on a couple of shows like The Last Days of Phil Hartman, and there was one that was done by NBC Universal, a different one, and they had tried to prevent that one from getting on. But then The Last Days of Phil Hartman, Bryn's brother was on, so it was easing up. So at one point, after Mike Thomas writes the book, he options that to me and wants me to adapt it as a screenplay. And I thought, well, what better way? And every time that we do something like this about Phil, and I hope the kids can understand this, none of us want to sensationalize what happened. We don't want him to be forgotten, and we want the world to know what kind of person he was, what a decent human being he was. Right. So when I went to write the screenplay, I finished it. The family loved it. Mike was thrilled with it. Joel Gallen, who was the producer who Phil introduced me to, he loved it. He got attached as the producer, and we started shopping it around. We got it to Dana Carvey. Carvey loved it, and we were going to try to get him on as a producer. But he said there's only one stipulation. Yeah. I will only get involved if it has the blessing of the two kids. And right away I thought, oh boy, this could be problematic because I know how they feel about these things. So I kind of circled back with Joel and I said, we have to be very careful and we have to tread very lightly with the kids when it comes to this. So what I ended up doing, and with my writing experience, I feel like I'm pretty good at putting some words together that will hopefully resonate with somebody. And I worked on this letter that I wrote to Bergen, his daughter, for a week and showed it to everybody that I knew and respected. Joel would give me notes on my notes. I felt like I was writing another screenplay. And we got it to a place where we thought it was perfect. And basically what the letter said was, Bergen, you don't know me. I know you're aware of who I am. And I just want you to know that I have written a screenplay about your parents' life. And I also want you to know, too, I'm not doing this for the money. And I probably shouldn't even say this out loud. I don't even care if I get paid. I just want his story to be told by people who knew him. And that's right. And I'm trying to involve people who knew his, like just every, like I want this to be something that you're proud of. And there was another version. Jason Priestley was going to direct a script, and I actually got a chance to read this script. And that version of Phil's life was exactly what I've heard the kids have been told, that he was kind of an absent parent, more obsessed with career, and it really did not make him look good. And Angel, the biggest fear in the world that I have is that somebody who doesn't have this emotional investment is going to make this movie, and what puts asses in the seats more so than a murder-suicide and sensationalizing that and making that the focus and not focusing on who they really were as people. And in writing the movie, I was very careful to put elements of some of those things that he wasn't perfect. You know, I put him in warts and all. Of course. And I did the same with his mom. And again, I didn't know her as well, but Mike Thomas did tons of research on that front and did a great job and gave me a great guideline for all of that. So what I ended up doing was I finally get this note to where I want it to be. I go, because I don't know how to contact Bergen. I go onto her Instagram page and I'm trying to figure out how to message it to her. And like, look, I'm 52 now, and sometimes the technology gets away from me. And I couldn't find how to message her. I'm like, is she blocking the messaging or whatever? Or do I have to like her page to be able to message her? So I liked her page, and inside of 5 minutes, she blocked me.
She knows who you are.
Yeah, and I am blocked to this day. So then what I ended up doing was I had my lovely wife go on to Bergen's Instagram page and send that note to Bergen. My wife did not get blocked. My wife was able to see that it was read. I never heard anything again. Fast forward several months later, and Joel is still being the good producer, and he said, hey, I ran into Lovitz. And I told him about the movie, and he said, and it did not go well. And I said, well, why? He said, well, first of all, John hates the book.
Really?
And John wanted nothing to do with the book and could not even read the book because it still hurts him so much to this day. He just doesn't want to revisit it at all. He's very sympathetic with the kids. So Joel tried to tell John, look, Dana loves the movie, and Brian sent Bergen a message and never heard back on it. So he said, I'm going to call her. Lovett said, I'll call her right now.
Oh.
So he picked up the phone in front of my producer and said, Bergen, it's John. Did you get a letter from Brian Mulhern? And all I got was confirmation that she had received it. And he hung up and said, they want nothing to do with the movie. They want nothing to do with the book. And I don't even want to read the movie. And at that point, I think Joel, to some degree, kind of gave up. We started making some headway off of the last days of Phil Hartman because suddenly, for the first time, one of Bryn's family members, as I mentioned, was involved and brought in amazing home videos that I had never seen of their place in Encino, and him interacting with the kids, and Bryn being a great mom and all that stuff. And the brother was willing to talk for the first time. So we tried to make some inroads with him. And there seemed to be a little bit of a softening. And I thought, well, hopefully maybe Bergen's kind of taken some time. And then the pandemic hit and everything just blew up. Now, nothing's happening at all. Robert Smigel has the script. He's supposed to read it. We're still trying. We're still plugging. But look, I say that to say this too. I understand their reluctance, but I hope if any of this gets back to them, please know I love your dad. Like, your dad was like a father figure to me. And I love him with all my heart. And I just want his story told the right way by a producer who your dad introduced me to him, that knows him that well. And with a Dana Carvey who knows him so well.
And this is the reason why we're having this conversation, is because we love Phil and you know him on a personal level. This is the exploitative nature of crime in this story. It's very real. And, you know, I've searched through the podcasts about Phil Hartman and his death. And some of them are just so they're horrible. Like, who really killed Phil Hartman? Like, come on, we know the story, you assholes. We know the horrible story of what happened that night and how it destroyed these families. Can you not keep telling this story this way?
Well, and that's, as I said, that's my biggest nightmare. I lose sleep over it. I'm just always so afraid that one day I'm going to pick up a Hollywood trade, and see that somebody who doesn't know him is making the movie. And then I've got to have a knot in my stomach until I see what it ends up being.
Yeah.
And I don't want that. And like, look, I was a fan before I was a friend. And now I'm all of those things wrapped up into one. And I'm so invested in it. And I've seen it done well, and I really do think that there would be an interest in it. People just, they love that whole nostalgia thing, you know. I don't know about you, I can't stop watching Cobra Kai, and there's been a lot of biopics over the last several years that have done very well. Bohemian Rhapsody, you know, things like that. And I think when done the right way, I the one thing that I love is when Bohemian Rhapsody came out, we have a soon-to-be 23-year-old here who one night I heard him listening to Queen, which I had never heard in my life. But it's like it brings them, it raises this awareness, it exposes them to another generation. And before Phil is forgotten, I would love for all of these people who had no idea, weren't alive when he was alive, just to see an accurate portrayal of him and then get curious and hop onto YouTube and watch what he did and how brilliant he was. That's my only motivation in this. That's it. And for all of us who do love him, that's all we want, is for him to be remembered well. And that's why anytime I'm asked to do something like this, when ABC knocks on my door, I feel like it's my duty to try to do that and let people know how amazing he was, not only as a talent, but as a human being.
Because when something like this happens, and again, it's been almost 25 years since Phil and Bryn died, everybody always wants to say that they knew someone. We see that every time something happens, someone passes away.
They want to be a part of the story.
They want to be a part of the story. Oh, well, we were friends. There's so much bullshit that's associated with that, that it's most important to speak to the people who really know. That's John Lovitz. And he has, I could never tell someone that they can't feel the way that they feel. John Lovitz is going to feel that way. maybe for the rest of his life, that he had his beloved friend taken from him in such a traumatic and violent way.
And by the way, to John, like, I get it, you know.
Yeah,
I would never want to do anything that would hurt you or besmirch him, and I understand those concerns.
Mm-hmm.
Another project I've worked on to speak to that, I lost my mom to COVID.
Yeah.
I wrote a play about it that's going to be staged, and I want her remembered in a certain way. I want that period of time remembered in a certain way. I want people who didn't go through a death in a family during that time. I want people to see what that was like, how difficult it was when you know, only I could be there with her when she passed, but not even in the same room. My dad couldn't be there. My brother couldn't be there. How difficult it was to put a funeral together. My dad still had COVID at the time. It was like this nightmare. And I'm like, I just feel like it's really important to have that moment in time captured so people can use it as a reference point. And I feel just as passionately about all of these things, and they do. You can tell how much he is revered and adored, because every couple of years I get a call from, we're doing the documentary, I get a call from my old friend Angel. Actually, you and I have been going back and forth on this one. We got to do it. I haven't seen you or talked to you in 100 years, and it's been great catching up with you, but also to get another opportunity to even share Phil with you and to everybody who listens to you. It's an honor that I don't take lightly. I take it very seriously.
And this is a special show because, you know, Crime of the Truest Kind is really New England centric. And, I'm taking liberties because you are a New Englander. You're a native Rhode Islander. Phil Hartman lived in Maine and Connecticut after Canada, before California, despite the fact that what happened, that his death didn't take place here in New England. I think of it as part of some New England history because it was very much part of your life and your career.
Yeah, no, very much so. My brothers as well. And even as I mentioned, Joel, the producer, went to the University of Rhode Island. You know, there's a lot of New England all over this story.
And you've been really helpful. You connected me with a couple of great people who now I call friends. Scott James, the writer. I did a 3-part episode about the station nightclub fire. And
by the way, well done to both you and Scott, because I did listen, and
thank you.
That was fascinating.
Thank you. He's wonderful. What a great conversation. And Tom Stewart, the comic who survived the station nightclub fire. I mean, you can't have those conversations. You can't make that shit up. You know what I mean? Like the authentic nature of the conversations I had with these people, you can't make this shit up. And it's wrong to do that. So I wanted to talk to you about Phil Hartman because I know that you knew him and you love him and you worked with him and you had a very personal relationship with him. That's what this is about. So anybody who's listening to this, far and wide, the only thing we ever want to do here is just share our love for Phil. And we're very sad what happened to him. But all that information is out. We're not making up anything.
No.
All of that information has already been established. It's out there. We're not going to vilify anyone. That's not what I do.
No, I respect your approach. And you and I had a discussion about that too. How you do it. You're not trying to sensationalize anything. You're trying to be sympathetic and in some ways bring these people back. Who were they? You know, what kind of people were they?
Because
how have their families and friends been affected?
That's right. They are someone's parents. There are children out, grown children now. But, you know, their children are going to have children, and Bryn and Phil are going to have grandchildren. And what are their memories? You know, how are they going to know them? You know, how hard did their families work to keep their memory? It's a very difficult situation to have a loved one who killed their husband. That's got to be a horrible thing to contend with every single day.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, they were both so young, and I really wonder what memories they have specifically of that time, or of, you know, what kind of people that their parents were. And that's why it's so important to get the story told correctly, be it via a podcast, a screenplay, a book, a TV documentary, whatever it is.
It's a heavy subject, even, all this time later, and, we're coming up on 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
Someone's going to want to mark that occasion.
Very likely. And again, hopefully it'll be done in the best possible way. Time will tell, and we shall see. And we're on life's timetable. As I said to you earlier, the craziest things happen when you least expect them. For as much as you like to think you're in control of your life, we're all just hurtling through the universe on this rock, just waiting to see what's coming up next.
And even Phil said that the last days of Phil Hartman, there were those videotapes that the family shared.
Mm-hmm.
When he's talking about how, I'm in the best time of my life. I'm so proud to be a father. It's the best thing that ever happened to me. We don't know what tomorrow holds.
Mm-hmm.
It could all be done. It could all be over. And sadly, not that long after that, he was gone.
Mm-hmm. At least in my heart and my mind, he'll never truly be gone. And I hope that to people who, the legions of fans out there who I get to hear and meet on social media, who have all kinds of questions, and even Mike in writing the book, you said at the time, he said, it's amazing how many years later people still revere him on that level, like, and feel like that they knew him and are just so curious and interested in it, and for the right reasons. Not so much about wanting to focus on how it all ended for him.
That's right. That's right. How he lived. We know how he died. I want to know how he lived. And I want to know it from somebody who lived it with him. I mean, that's the best way to memorialize someone, is to respectfully share those memories. I think that's the best way to do it. You look at those videos, you go to YouTube and you see all of the views for all of the SNL skits, and even his appearances. I was watching his appearances on various talk shows. He was just a monster of talent. Good Lord, I hope his children got some of that. There's no information about that.
Well, Robert Morton, who used to be Letterman's producer, said Phil was one of Dave's favorite guests. And the thing is, we've worked radio, we've conducted interviews, and somebody who's really good and entertaining is worth their weight in gold. And Phil never walked in cold to anything. Phil went in with a game plan, prepared, brought the goods, brought the house down, and that's why he was so sought after when it came to that. And even he got to host. I don't know if you ever got to see. Remember when Charles Grodin had his talk show on CNBC or whatever it was?
Yeah.
And he filled in for Grodin and did an episode with Farley. If you get a chance to watch that, yeah. In retrospect, it's heartbreaking in some ways because we all know how that movie ended. But
and they died within 6 months of one another.
Talking to him about Farley's death and how upset he was by that, and not knowing what was to come. Oh my God. Crazy.
And then there's the continued. Is there an SNL curse? No, I mean there's the law of averages. There were so many folks that were a part of that production over all of these years.
Right. Mm-hmm.
People get sick. People do drugs. People have bad relationships. Is there an SNL curse? Come on. How could there be?
I will say, with my comedy experience too, there are a lot of damaged people in comedy.
Yeah.
who need to maybe do some unhealthy things to work around it, legal, illegal, whatever, to deal with their demons. So, that might increase the odds a little bit. And especially when you consider, SNL starts in 1975 and there's a different time. And, over the years, attitudes have changed about drug use and things of that nature. So you get damaged people, you get substances involved and things like that. Yeah, there's going to be a price to pay for that.
Mm-hmm.
It's so sad to think of the people who have left us. I mean, the immense talents of Belushi, Farley.
Incredible.
It's like, oh.
I mean, Jan Hooks died a couple years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Magnificent. I mean, I remember just watching SNL as far back as I can remember. I remember watching it as like a young adult, just, hanging out with all of my friends, piled up in a bed watching like the Sandler stuff. And I remember probably one of the funniest skits was a Dana Carvey skit. It was called Massive Head Wound Harry. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Oh my God. And the dog is like,
my dog.
oh my God. Some of that is just the best stuff. And I mean, no one can forget Phil doing Bill Clinton. I mean, that took him like into the stratosphere. I mean, that was like, he was a player and then Bill Clinton came along and that was like,
that took him to the next level for
later
sure.
on that happened with Tina Fey and Sarah Palin, but it happened first with Phil Hartman and Bill Clinton.
Well, Phil had told me too that was one of his frustrations on SNL for the longest time. He said, I wasn't the guy who had the catchphrase or who had the character who they made the movie about. But
right.
One of the first impressions I got of him and how seriously he took everything he ever did, the first day that I'm on the floor, Studio 8H, I'm watching him. Sally Field was the host that week, and he was doing a sketch where he appeared to her because he played Jesus. And it was Jesus just basically saying, with Sally Field in the kitchen, she's like, oh, praise Jesus. And, please let my souffle come out well. And blah, blah, just like praying for everything. And so Phil kind of comes in as Jesus and he's like, look, I really appreciate just how devoted you are, but I've kind of got a lot going on here. So, about the souffle. And I said to him, that's a pretty good premise. And right away, he went into this very lengthy conversation with me. He said, it's funny that you should mention that because time and time again, I have to sit down with the writers and their knee jerk is, because he did this, I'm sure you've seen it. It's a classic sketch of his where he's playing Ronald Reagan. Oh, yeah. And the Girl Scout comes in and he's like, well, and and then as soon as everybody leaves, like, back to work! And completely insane and maniacal and not what you would expect at all. He said, that's cool for comedy in a situation like that. But when it comes to Jesus, I try to tell these writers, there are a lot of people who have so much invested in this man of peace, and he was a man of peace. And I think I'm doing them and him a disservice if Jesus is in this slow boil and he's getting angry. And I was like, the amount of thought he is putting into these sketches. And he said the one time where he really had to tone it down. You remember when Spade had that character where he was the receptionist?
And you are.
So Jesus comes in and appears to him. And Spade starts with, and you are? He's like, well, I'm the Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And this is regarding, and
classic.
They really wanted Jesus to start to lose it. He's like, I need to speak with Dick Clark about I have a message that I would love to use his airwaves. And then Spade is going on and on. At one point, Phil goes, listen, friend. But that's as far as he would take it. Yeah. And I think too, he also knew, and I think to some degree we've lost this, and this is an innocence about SNL because just comedically, things are getting so much more angry. I did love that sweetness where his caricature of Clinton and Carvey's of Bush, opposite ends of the political spectrum, but still just so cartoony and innocent and not polarizing. And it didn't make you like hate them, or it didn't offend you in any way. You didn't feel like you were being preached at, or
it was just an exaggeration of things that they were.
And now I think it's almost like there's this feeling that, well, we need to be sanctimonious and we need to lecture a little bit and we need to make it a little bit more political. And I think to some degree, like, are we not focusing on the funny? Like, what are we trying to accomplish here? And he was very cognizant of that too. Whenever he would do somebody politically, and I don't want to sound like this old man who's back in my day. That's how it was, because people used to say that with Carson to me, like he never knew what side of the aisle he was on. He would make fun of everybody, but I the older I become, the more I think I respect that, because I think it's harder to pull off. You don't want to do an angry Jesus. You could probably make that crazy funny, but you'd rather tie that arm behind your back and see if you can find another comedic kernel. That's why I respect a comedian like Brian Regan, who has worked clean now for 30 plus years. And I've interviewed Brian many times, got to know him a little bit, and I used to say to him, like, why do you make it that much harder on yourself? And then one day I had a discussion with him. I said, you're a parent, you never talk about your kids.
Yeah.
And I would think that would be just comedic gold for you. And he said, you want to know why I never put my kids in my act? He said, because I'm afraid that if they see me talking about them on stage, they might start acting differently around me for fear that it might become material. I don't want them to live that kind of life. And my respect for him went up. That I'm like, here you are tying your hand behind your back because you're working clean. Now you're not talking about your kids, but you're still somehow finding a way to get this done. And I have as much respect for that as I did for the 20-minute lecture I got about Phil playing Jesus, and it's 4 minutes long, With that commitment to the craft and having enough confidence in yourself that I don't need that. For people who know nothing of my radio career, you and I worked on an alternative rock station 20 plus years ago together. I came up as a rock guy, and I came up prior to the Janet Jackson, Justin Timberlake, the FCC's going crazy. Everybody, we have to watch every single thing that we say.
Oh yeah.
And I, people go back on Twitter and they find something that somebody said 8 years ago, and then it ruins their career. And I'm like, God, if some people went back and listened to some of the stuff I said, on that radio station back in the day.
So many things that I wouldn't even dream of saying today. Like I still owe people apologies, I'm sure, about some of the shit that I
really. Plus, you're young, and like when you're young too, like the laugh is the most important thing.
You just want the laugh.
Everything else be damned.
That's right.
But now, fast forward, and I even said to you, I've been on a country station for the last going on 13 years. I don't know how that happened exactly. I also know now that it's a completely different audience. It's the mom with the kids in the back seat. And that becomes my challenge, to deliver radio in a Toy Story way where mom and dad can watch the movie and still find ways to be entertained by it and not have to worry about the kids. And I think that's something that I've learned from the likes of Phil Hartman and Brian Regan. And I consider that, like, I'm more proud of some of the stuff that I do now, although I'm real proud of some of the stuff that I did on that radio station that we were at. But I really do. I take pride in that, because it is that much harder and more difficult, but it's that much more satisfying as well.
Right. And I said this earlier, probably on Twitter. I'm like, normalize being a better person than you used to be.
Right.
Because we're in a world where something that somebody could have said, like you said, 8 or 10 years ago, well, how did you not know 8 or 10 years ago that you shouldn't have said that? Because it was 8 or 10 years ago. I was not the same person. I was not the same person then that I am now, and realize how that probably worked for a minute, and it probably wasn't really that great anyway.
Well, it's amazing too, as Eddie Murphy started signing his deal with Netflix and they brought back all of that old stuff. You go watch Eddie Murphy Delirious now. Oh my God. And even he's like, wow. But at the time, I remember I had the cassette of that, I literally did the thing where I had a book with a thing carved out so I could put the cassette in, so my dad couldn't see that I had it, and saw nothing wrong with anything that was being said. And that was just that moment in time. And, as a society, we both evolve sometimes and we devolve, and the game changes and the playing field changes. But you need to keep that perspective when it comes to stuff like that.
Well, in radio back in our day, we were doing alternative rock radio that went toward the cock rock. I'll say it. We went to the hard rock.
We were trying to get the attention of the 18-year-old males.
It turned very blue, and we were along for the ride.
We sure were. Boy, that was some fun working at that radio station, huh, my friend?
Well, there's some great things that came of it, like the friendships that we have. And, it's really nice to have those call letters on your resume when you're working through or attempting to work through the industry. And it's completely upside down, and everything about radio has changed, as that's a whole nother show we can do. Sure. But it truly was a great experience. I'm definitely a far better person now than I was then.
And I will say too, I do think, and not everybody on the show got along, not everybody in the Rolling Stones get along.
That's right.
Aerosmith, the same thing, but there was some really funny stuff on that show. And sometimes I'll go back and listen to it. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm dismissing all of it out of hand, because there was some really, really good stuff. And that was as talented of a show as I think that I've ever worked on. So, I put it into its context and its little box, and I respect it for that period of time. And I don't want to dismiss things everything that I did, throw the baby out with the bathwater.
That's right.
It was in a lot of ways a great time and a great show.
It was really fun. I remember going to events like you do as a host. You go and you shake hands and kiss babies, as it were. I remember going to events. When you do the morning show like we were doing, you got to get up before God. Definitely before the sun. And I remember going to events, and then people want to be around you, and they're like buying you drinks. I remember having drinks lined up.
Oh yeah,
people buying drinks, and I remember times I would look at all those drinks. I'm like, there's no fucking way I'm drinking those. I would just turn around and walk out. Well,
imagine what people were trying to do for Belushi and Farley.
Imagine
along those lines.
Imagine
especially with the reputations that they had, and you want to talk about the black cloud that hangs over SNL, the curse. Look, you get exposed to stuff like that that much.
That's
you
true.
Put yourself in those positions.
That's true.
Those odds are going to jump quite a bit.
You're absolutely right. It's a phenomenal time in history. All of those comics coming out of that fertile ground that SNL was and is. It still is. People coming out of there. I can't say that, every show's a home run.
Well, and that's the thing that people also have to realize. For as long as it has been on, there are going to be peaks and valleys. There are going to be some casts that hit and some that you're just like, what are we doing here? And how many times did you get the Saturday Night Dead thing? And is this going to be the last season? But really big piece of credit that I'll give that show. And I mean, and Lorne, obviously just such a visionary and such a guy who really can recognize talent and has been responsible for so many careers. It's an old white dude that doesn't necessarily have to keep up with the times or get it, but the guy clearly gets it and knows all right, this is where we have to go now. This is what we have to do. And talk about a guy who's seen it all and seen,
but he was there for it. Do you think that he's serious about retiring at the 50-year anniversary?
Those are the rumblings that, and I have friends who have worked there and they see no reason to not believe that's going to be the case. And look, he walked away from it after year 5.
He did.
He's not afraid to do it necessarily. It's funny. I also have a lot of friends who worked with Letterman, and I was such a huge fan of Dave, but I really felt like the last 5 years, he might have stuck around a little too long, kind of took the foot off the gas a little bit.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to somebody who had worked very closely with him while he was still on and while the foot was off the gas. And I said, why is he continuing to do this if he clearly doesn't have the passion to do it? And to speak to damaged people in comedy, that person at that time said to me, Brian, it's almost like with his life, he doesn't know what else to do. It's just like, and if you watch him in interviews now, I think if he had it to do over again, he would have left a lot earlier. And he said, I just hate that person that I became where my whole life was that show. And he said, and I think it made me a worse human being. And now I'm focusing on being a better human being, to which sometimes I say, yeah, but when you were all about the show late night on NBC, I don't know that there was ever a better show. I know that you cared too much and you were probably an a-hole to a lot of people, but oh my God, was that great television and just so revolutionary.
Yeah. He was just quirky. He was quirky enough as a personality that it set him apart from the other players.
Right. So I think for Lorne, is smart enough, given what I just said about him, about recognizing trends and maybe being a little bit ahead of them. I think Lorne's going to know when, all right, I'm kind of taking the foot off the gas, or maybe I'm not getting as much out of this as I used to. And I think as soon as he hits that moment, I don't think he's going to stick around too long. I think he's going to pass it on to somebody else. Who that person will be?
Yeah, that's a really great question.
I'd love to see like a Tina Fey step into that role. Or
I'm such a fan of hers. I fell down the rabbit hole researching stuff about Phil, watching a bunch of stuff about Phil, and then I was reading about the Groundlings, and then of course I had to go to Second City and read the list of the alums from Second City, and I fell down the rabbit hole of Tina Fey stuff, and she was on with Jimmy Fallon talking about how she rescued someone who was actually upriver without a paddle. The guy was in a kayak on the Hudson River, just him on a boat. She goes, he doesn't know it was me, but I saved a guy.
She's a mega talent. I think she's somebody else too. I think one of the most important parts of a job like that is being able to spot somebody who's perfect for the show, or somebody who you think can really bring something to the table. Because speaking of sketch variety and all the concerns they had about the Phil show and Martin Short show, and how many times have they tried to do it and it's failed, for it to last that long, it speaks to Lorne's ability to spot talent and nurture it and bring it along.
Have we kicked this topic to death?
I don't think there's anything left.
Is there anything left?
I think we have wrung the sponge to the point that we're giving ourselves blisters.
It's been so fun. I don't get to riff with people like this anymore,
And how often do people have a boatload of fun on a true crime podcast?
I know, it's usually so fucking morbid. No, I try to keep it respectfully light in areas of the presentation, if that makes sense.
Two things at play here. We have a history. We've known each other for decades.
Yeah.
And, speaking for me, I'm very fond of you, and I certainly hope that maybe there's a little bit of that coming back this way.
Absolutely. I am thrilled that you even agreed to have this conversation with me.
Oh, anything for you, my friend. And the other thing I want to say, too, about the fun element is, when I think of Phil, I don't want to think about how it ended. I want to think about the good, the fun times. And I think that's how you're able to maybe have some fun with something like this. And thanks for having me on. And, for as much as it's important for me to keep his legacy alive, it's also important for me to reconnect with you after all this time. Because, you get busy, you get caught up, you got all your dogs. I clearly have a dog who's very active. And, as I said, I'm stalking you on Facebook. I love Frito, your dog.
My baby.
In some ways, thanks to social media, we really haven't lost touch. I feel like I have a pretty good grasp of what's going on in your life. But with that having been said, what did we catch up for an hour and a half before we really threw the here?
Yes, we did.
A couple of times you jogged my memory on stories today. I was like, oh God, I totally forgot about that. I love when that happens because it can get so easy to forget about stuff.
I mean, I definitely know about Phil, and I'm familiar with a lot of his work. But there are nuances of the story that you want to be privy to. Everybody always talks about how he was a graphic designer and the record covers, but it's like, I didn't know he was a roadie. I don't really know that story. I didn't know the story about the Groundlings, how he just happened upon going and got up, and then they were like, you're pretty good. Why don't you join? He's like, I'll make you so much about it that, I didn't know. That's important to sort of connect the dots.
Mike Thomas, and not that you have time to read the book, but he did such an amazing job. And like I said, I was even like, dude, how did you track me down? Of all the people in the world, but he's completely out of media now, which is unfortunate because he's really, really good. But man, oh man, if you ever need to reference something, or if you want to look up something from Phil's life, It was a very good guide for the screenplay. It was more a question of, oh my God, there's so much here. What do I leave in? What do I take out? I can't. You can't do all of this. But
that was definitely one of the references that was brought up in a number of. It was cited a number of times in various things that I read about or I listened to. They were like, this book talks about. We got all this from this, and I got a lot of information from the last days, which I had seen when it first aired. And I remember watching.
I was put up a picture of me. I was like,
oh, yeah, I know him. And then I watched it again, but it was really a wealth of stuff. I know it's the truth.
Right.
You know, it's the truth because it's been vetted and it's honest. It's for a lot of this stuff. I really dig deep because, like I said, you're talking about people's lives and subsequent deaths, and you're talking about the worst day of the worst thing that ever happened to someone, and the people who have to survive and live through this, and it's important to get it right.
And speaking of last days, I just had this flashback. Speaking of his story being told properly, so I got a call from them, one of the producers at 2020, and she's like, we'll fly you to New York and we'll put you up in a hotel. It's like across the street from ABC, and we'll have you sit down. And like it was this arduous. It was like a 4-hour interview.
Wow.
Under the lights and everything, and the makeup and all that crap, and just so many questions. And in some ways, when it comes to talking about Phil, I can kind of go on autopilot because I've talked about it enough, and sometimes a couple of times you jogged my memory on stories today. I was like, oh God, I totally forgot about that. I love when that happens because it can get so easy to forget about stuff. By the time it came out, they contacted me and they're like, hey, you're in a decent amount, They said, like, you gave us a lot of really, really good stuff, and then you're like, but you don't know what's making it in and what doesn't make it in. And if the kids see it.
Weren't they both at the SNL 40th anniversary? Yeah. Didn't they show up?
She definitely was. I don't know if he was. Yeah. She definitely was.
Wow. What a tragic kind of legacy to have to deal with. I mean, because they were children when this happened. They had to come to terms with that their whole life, and still having to come to terms with that stuff every time an anniversary rolls around, or interest from the media rolls around, or something like this crops up. If there's a new podcast episode, which there are a lot, not all of them are very good. There were a handful of podcast episodes about Phil that were actually pretty well done, were pretty decent. Some of them were absolute garbage.
Yeah, I tend to, believe it or not, like not listen to a lot of those because I'm just afraid I'm going to hear something that's going to piss me off.
And they're out there.
Yeah.
There was one I started listening to today, and I stopped it. I'm like, fuck off. They're like, who killed Phil Hartman? I'm like, we know what happens. That's the exploitative, blood and gore shit that I hate about this genre.
I don't really care about that stuff so much, but yeah, oh God, if another movie gets made by somebody who sensationalizes the shit out of it, I'll be beside myself upset.
And there are episodes like Snapped and stuff that have to be awful.
I actually saw the Snapped.
Yeah, I haven't.
And I saw there was another the autopsy of Phil Hartman, which that one I probably shouldn't have seen that one.
They did one on Eddie Van Halen, and the family was really pissed off.
I know,
that, right?
I do want to see that one, in spite of Wolfgang being very upset about it. I'm very curious. Well, I hate to end it on that note, but I think we're pretty well caught up now. I think we know.
Good catching up. Well, you're a good man, Brian Mulhern. Thanks for indulging me. I had about 3.5 hours of audio to edit. I really, really tested my digital editing mettle. There was a lot in there, and I pulled a lot out. I took out a fair amount of things that were just not appropriate to include in a public interview. Also, by the way, some things about the Hartman's family that I didn't think were appropriate to share. Could I have shared them? Yes. Should I have shared them? No. I know it makes for a sexier story when you lay out the dirt. So I try to pick and choose that stuff. So thank you for listening. Thank you, Brian Mulhern. Brian Mulhern has written a screenplay You Might Remember Me, The Life and Times of Phil Hartman. It is based on the Mike Thomas book that we referenced several times throughout our 2 interviews. You Might Remember Me, The Life and Times of Phil Hartman by Mike Thomas. We talk about the screenplay and the option for the film, I think in part 1. I hope you liked it. It was something that Brian and I have spoken about for many months to do this interview about Phil. And yes, it doesn't completely fit in with what Crime of the Truest Kind is, but it is loosely based in New England. And, well, I take a lot of liberties. The Last Days of Phil Hartman, the ABC 2020 special, you can watch online. Everything, of course, is posted at crimeofthetruestkind.com. Everything that we spoke about. You can listen to Brian's radio show. He does mornings at Cat Country in Providence, Rhode Island. And do be kind to Brian. Morning radio can make you cranky. I know this from firsthand experience. You wake up before the sun. And yes, I will be back with more New England crime stories in 2 weeks. I'm on vacation. Follow the show at Crime of the Truest Kind. Listen to the show. Share it on social media. Tag me. I will share it with others. Yes, rate the show. Since I am back, I'm essentially starting all over again. So good reviews and ratings really help the show grow. And I would love the show to grow. And I can only do that with your help. Send your show ideas. I love your show ideas. I have many stories in the works. I have many show scripts. Thank you for listening. Yep. Lock your goddamn doors. I'm going to go out with the Doomed theme song.